You've been trying. Oh, how you've been trying. You've been pushing, striving, praying, working late into the night, trying to get things right. You've been convincing yourself that if you just push harder, if you just do one more thing, if you just muster one more ounce of effort, God will finally step in and bless you. But let me tell you something. That's not where the power is. That's not what God is waiting for. God isn't waiting for you to try harder. He's waiting for something far deeper, far more profound than your effort. You see, there's a misconception that we need to earn God's attention. We think that our long hours, our tears, our relentless striving somehow tip the scales and make God move. And yet, the Bible whispers a different story. It says in Isaiah 3:15, in quietness and trust is your strength, not in the grind, not in the hustle, not in trying harder. There is strength in resting, in surrendering, in simply saying, Lord, I can't do this on my own, but I trust you. God is not impressed by your effort, but by your trust. Think about that for a moment. For years, many of us have been living under the misconception that the more we push, the more God notices us. We believe that long hours, constant striving, relentless prayer, endless giving, and tireless labor somehow earn us favor in the eyes of God. But the truth is, God doesn't measure your worth or your blessings by how hard you try. He measures your heart. He measures your willingness to step out in faith and trust him. Your effort may get you a temporary result, but it cannot unlock the supernatural power of God. Only trust can. Look at the life of Abraham. Abraham waited decades for the promise of a son. There were seasons of doubt, seasons of waiting, and seasons when human reasoning tempted him to take matters into his own hands. He could have tried harder, manipulated situations, or engineered outcomes to force God's hand, but it was his trust, his unwavering belief in the promise of God that opened the door to a miracle. Abraham's effort alone could not have produced Isaac. It was faith, it was trust, it was surrendering to God's timing and his way that brought the impossible into reality. God was not impressed by Abraham's striving. He was moved by Abraham's trust. Now, consider your own life. How often have you exhausted yourself trying to make things happen? You've worked harder than ever before, maybe sacrificing sleep, comfort, or even relationships, thinking that your effort is the key to unlocking God's blessing. You may even feel guilty when things don't turn out as planned, as if your lack of success proves that you didn't try hard enough. But here is the truth. God isn't sitting in heaven tapping his foot, waiting for you to push harder. He is waiting for you to let go. He is waiting for you to trust him enough to stop trying to control the outcome and allow his wisdom, his power, and his timing to work in your life. Trust is an act of surrender. It's a decision to release your grip on life and say, Lord, I don't have the power to make this happen, but I believe you do. This is not passive. This is not laziness. This is an active declaration that God is God and that you recognize your dependence on him. Trust is what allows God to operate supernaturally. Effort alone may get you to a certain point, but only trust takes you beyond human limitations. God honors trust. God blesses trust. God moves mountains for those who choose to believe him more than they believe their own abilities. Faith is not about trying harder. It's about believing bigger. It's not about exhausting yourself with endless activity. It's about quieting your heart and saying, God, I believe you have this. I believe your plan is greater than mine. I trust your timing. I trust your way. There is a divine release that comes when you stop striving and start trusting. It is like removing a dam. The water of God's power flows freely where once your striving had blocked it. When you rely on your own strength, your heart is full of tension, your mind is crowded with anxiety, and your spirit feels heavy. But trust liberates. Trust invites peace. Trust creates space for miracles. Jesus demonstrated this principle perfectly. He did not strain to perform miracles in his own strength. He did not exhaust himself trying to prove his authority. Instead, he operated in complete trust and reliance on the Father. And because of that trust, mountains moved, the blind received sight, the lame walked, and the dead were raised. Notice carefully, his power was released not by trying harder, but by absolute trust in the Father. That same principle applies to you today. God's power is available to you, not because of your effort, but because of your trust. Your heart is the key. You may be strong in action, brilliant in planning, diligent in work, and consistent in prayer, but if your heart is not surrendered, if your trust is incomplete, God's supernatural cannot flow. Effort is limited. Trust is limitless. Effort can produce results, but only trust can produce miracles. Only trust can move the invisible hands of heaven. Only trust can bring life to dead situations. Only trust can turn long seasons of waiting into testimonies of breakthrough. So today, stop trying to prove yourself to God. Stop exhausting yourself with endless effort. God is not impressed with your hustle, your tears, or your perfect execution. He is moved by your trust. He is waiting for you to take that step of faith, to let go of control, to release the weight of trying, and to simply say, Lord, I believe you. I trust you. I surrender. That simple act, that single moment of trust carries more power than a lifetime of striving ever could. Your miracles are not in your hands. They are in God's. And when you choose trust over effort, you align with the power of heaven, and nothing will ever be the same again. Strength comes in quietness and trust, not in relentless striving. So often we've been taught that to succeed, to see breakthroughs, or to experience God's power, we have to push harder, work longer, and exhaust ourselves trying to make things happen. We live in a culture of effort, a culture that applauds busyness, and yet the Bible whispers a truth that is radical, liberating, and life-changing. In quietness and trust is your strength, not in more work, not in more struggle, not in trying harder. Your true power comes when you stop straining and start surrendering. Think about the way God works. He doesn't push from the outside. He moves from the inside. His Spirit flows where the heart is receptive, where there is peace, where trust resides. When you are frantic, anxious, and overwhelmed, you are actually blocking the very flow you are longing for. Your pushing cannot create God's power, but your quietness can invite it. Strength is released in surrender, in calm, in the confidence that God is already at work, even when you cannot see it. Consider Elijah standing on Mount Carmel. The prophets of Baal had exhausted themselves, crying out and cutting themselves, hoping for a response from their God. They worked hard, they struggled, they fought, and yet nothing happened. Then Elijah prayed, and God answered. Not because Elijah screamed louder or worked harder, but because Elijah stood in quietness and trust. He didn't push God to act. He trusted that God would act. And in that trust, fire came down from heaven. Strength came in stillness. Power came in peace. Trust unlocked the miracle. We often forget this principle in our own lives. We think that if we just work a little harder, pray a little longer, or push a little further, God will finally notice us. We grind, we toil, we strain, and yet the breakthrough seems distant. The answers seem delayed, and our hearts grow weary. But God is not waiting for you to try harder. He is waiting for you to stop, to pause, to rest in Him, and to trust that His timing, His power, and His plan are perfect. Quietness and trust are not signs of laziness or weakness. They are signs of wisdom and faith. They are the pathways to supernatural strength that no human effort can produce. Think about the story of Mary, the mother of Jesus. When she received the angel's message, she didn't struggle, debate, or try to force things into her understanding. She quietly received it and responded with trust. I am the Lord's servant. May your word to me be fulfilled. Her quiet submission became the vessel through which God brought forth the Savior of the world. Strength was not in her ability to manage the impossible situation, but in her willingness to trust, to surrender, and to rest in God's plan. And it's the same for you today. Your life may feel chaotic, your problems may seem overwhelming, and your circumstances may look impossible. You may feel the pressure to push, to control, to fix everything with your own strength. But God is calling you to something different. Stop. Step into quietness. Stop trying to manufacture the results. Stop straining under the weight of your own expectations and trust Him. Trust that He is already at work, even when you cannot see it. Trust that His power is not limited by your efforts. Trust that the breakthrough is coming, and it will come in His perfect way and timing. Strength and quietness is not passive. It is not giving up. It is not waiting without action. It is active faith, a deliberate choice to stop relying on your own strength and start relying fully on God's. It is a conscious surrender, a decision to let God lead, guide, and provide. It is like standing in the middle of a storm and saying, Lord, I cannot control the wind or the waves, but I trust you to hold me steady. That trust becomes your strength, your anchor, your supernatural source of power. When you stop trying to force things, when you stop scrambling, when you stop believing that your effort alone can change your situation, something incredible happens. God's presence floods the space you've created. Peace rises, clarity comes, doors open, relationships heal, and miracles manifest. Your quietness is not weakness. It is the gateway for God's unstoppable power to move in your life. So today, hear this clearly. Your striving will only exhaust you, but your trust will strengthen you. Your pushing may give temporary results, but your surrender will bring lasting miracles. Your frantic effort can never produce what God's quiet supernatural power can accomplish. Stop running on empty. Stop trying to carry it all yourself. Step into quietness. Choose trust over turmoil. Rest in God's wisdom and his timing. Align your heart with him, and you will discover a strength that goes beyond what human effort could ever achieve. God is not impressed by the length of your struggle or the intensity of your effort. He is moved by the depth of your trust, by the surrender in your heart, and by the quiet faith that says, I will not push. I will not strive. I will not control. I will trust you, Lord. In that moment, strength rises, miracles unfold, and the impossible becomes possible. The breakthrough you've been chasing doesn't come through harder work. It comes through quietness, trust, and surrender to the one who holds all power in his hands. Surrender is the key that unlocks God's supernatural power. This is a truth that can completely transform the way you live, the way you pray, and the way you experience God in every area of your life. For far too long, many of us have been trying to carry burdens, solve problems, and create breakthroughs on our own. We have relied on our understanding, our strategies, and our energy, believing that if we just push a little harder, work a little longer, and plan a little better, God will finally step in and do what we have been waiting for. But that's not how God's power operates. God's supernatural moves are released when we surrender, when we stop striving, and when we let him take the lead. Surrender is not weakness. Surrender is not giving up. It is a declaration of trust. It is an acknowledgement that God is God and you are not. It is the act of lifting your hands, opening your heart, and saying, Lord, I cannot do this on my own, but I believe you can. This simple act of surrender, it's more powerful than any amount of effort, more effective than any strategy, and more productive than endless striving. Surrender creates a space for God's presence to flow. It is in that space that miracles, breakthroughs, and supernatural results begin to happen. Think about Moses and the parting of the Red Sea. The Israelites were trapped. The Egyptian army was behind them, and human logic screamed that there was no way forward. They could have tried to fight, run, or negotiate, but all their effort would have been in vain. It was when Moses obeyed God, lifted his staff, and acted in surrender, trusting God's instructions, that the sea divided. God's supernatural power was unleashed, not because of human effort, but because of surrendered obedience. The impossible became possible because someone chose to let go and let God act. Too many Christians try to manipulate circumstances through effort. We try to make things happen by praying more, working harder, or thinking through every possible solution. While diligence is important, relentless striving without surrender often leads to exhaustion, frustration, and disappointment. It is a trap that keeps you in the natural realm, trying to force outcomes with limited human power. But God calls you into the supernatural realm where his power can move without limitation. And the gateway to that realm is surrender. Surrender requires humility. It requires admitting that you do not have all the answers and that your own strength is not enough. It requires believing that God's wisdom, timing, and power surpass anything you can do. This is not always easy. Our nature wants to control, to strategize, and to fix. But the more you cling to control, the more you block the flow of God's power. Surrender is the opposite of control. It is the release of your own efforts in exchange for his divine intervention. It is trusting that the one who created the universe knows exactly how to move in your life. Look at the story of Peter walking on water. Peter could have never done that on his own. He would have sunk immediately without Jesus' power lifting him. The moment Peter took his eyes off Jesus and focused on the wind and waves, he began to sink. Surrender is keeping your eyes on God, letting go of fear, doubt, and self-reliance, and stepping out in obedience. It is when you stay connected to him that the supernatural happens. Your stepping is not what saves you. Your trust is what allows God to act. Surrender also transforms your heart. When you stop striving in your own strength, you experience peace, joy, and freedom. The weight of responsibility lifts, anxiety fades. You no longer feel the pressure to make everything work perfectly. Instead, you rest in the assurance that God is working all things together for your good. Surrender is liberating because it shifts your focus from what you must do to what God can do. Your role is not to perform miracles. Your role is to trust the miracle worker. Many of us miss breakthroughs because we are trying too hard. We are attempting to control the process, manipulate outcomes, or force doors open. But God's timing and methods are often different from ours. Surrender is the act of saying, I will not dictate how this happens. I will not fight God's plan. I will trust that he knows the way. It is in this place of trust and obedience that God's supernatural power is released. The beauty of surrender is that it aligns your life with heaven. It connects the natural to the supernatural, your human limitations to God's limitless ability. When you surrender, you position yourself for divine provision, healing, breakthrough, and favor. You create the environment for God's miracles to manifest. Surrender is not passive. It is the most active, powerful, and faith-filled action you can take. It is the secret that separates striving from supernatural living. So today, wherever you are in your life, in your struggles, your challenges, or your waiting, hear this clearly. God is not waiting for you to push harder. He is waiting for you to surrender. Let go of your control. Release your striving and step into trust. Say, Lord, I cannot do this on my own, but I believe you can. I surrender this situation to you. When you do, God's supernatural power will move. Doors that were closed will open. Mountains that seemed impossible to climb will shift. Breakthroughs that were delayed will arrive. Surrender unlocks the miracles that your effort alone could never achieve. Your strength, your breakthrough, your miracle begins the moment you stop relying on your own hands and fully place your life in God's. Surrender is the key. Trust him. Let him act. Let him show you the wonders that only he can perform. God waits for your openness, not your effort. This is a truth that changes everything about the way you approach life, faith, and your relationship with him. For too long, many of us have believed that God's blessings, his favor, his miracles, and his breakthrough are the rewards of relentless striving. We think if we just work harder, push longer, pray louder, or sacrifice more, God will finally notice us and act. But God's ways are not like ours. His power is not released by human effort. His supernatural works are unlocked by your openness, your willingness to step out, to believe, to receive, and to let him move in ways beyond your imagination. Openness begins in the heart. It starts when you stop trying to control everything and instead allow God to take the lead. It is the willingness to admit, Lord, I do not have the answers. I do not have the power, but I trust you to do what I cannot. You may have been straining, forcing outcomes, trying to make things happen with your own hands, and exhausting yourself in the process. But God is waiting for something far simpler, yet far more profound. A heart that is open, receptive, and willing to let him do the work. When you open your heart fully, when you remove resistance, when you set aside fear, pride, and doubt, you create a space where God's supernatural presence can flow freely. Think about the story of the woman with the issue of blood in the Bible. For 12 long years, she tried everything she could to find healing. She spent her money, tried remedies, and exhausted herself in the pursuit of a solution. Yet none of her effort brought the breakthrough she desperately needed. It was not until she reached out in faith with openness and humility that she touched the hem of Jesus' garment and experienced supernatural healing. Her openness, her willingness to believe that God could do what she could not, unlocked what her effort alone could never achieve. The same principle applies to your life today. God is not waiting for you to push hard, or he is waiting for you to open your heart to him. Openness also requires vulnerability. To be truly open to God, you must be willing to let go of control, to expose your weaknesses, and to admit your need for him. Many of us are like a tightly closed door, holding on to our pride, our plans, and our expectations. We say, I've got this, Lord, I'll handle it. But God's power cannot enter a closed heart. He waits for us to unclench our fists, to open our hands, and to say, I trust you, Lord. I am willing to let you act in my life. That openness is what invites miracles. That openness is what transforms situations that seem impossible into testimonies of glory. Consider Peter walking on the water. Peter's first step was an act of openness, a willingness to step out of the boat, away from safety and into the unknown. It was his willingness to open himself to Jesus' power that allowed him to experience the impossible. But the moment he took his eyes off Jesus and focused on the storm, doubt filled him and he began to sink. Openness is not just stepping out. It is keeping your heart, mind, and faith fully aligned with God. It is a continual posture of receptivity, not a one-time action. Openness also requires faith. Faith is the key that unlocks the doors of heaven, and openness is the door itself. You may have been closed off by fear, disappointment, or previous failures. You may have tried before and been hurt, let down, or frustrated. But God is not moved by your past. He is moved by your present willingness to open your heart to him. Openness is saying, I am ready, Lord. I am ready to receive your guidance, your provision, your healing, your favor, and your mirror. When you take that posture, you align yourself with heaven, and the supernatural begins to flow. Many people miss breakthroughs because they are too busy trying to make things happen on their own. They push, they plan, they labor, but they remain close to God's work. God is not waiting for more effort. He is waiting for openness. He is waiting for a heart that is ready to trust him fully, that is willing to receive, and that is humble enough to allow him to move in his perfect way. Openness is the moment when human striving ends and divine intervention begins. It is the threshold between natural effort and supernatural power. When you open your heart to God, you release his power into your circumstances. Relationships are restored. Finances are provided, doors open, healing manifests, and blessings arrive that no human effort could ever create. Openness allows God to show you solutions you could never imagine, paths you could never see, and miracles that defy logic. God's power is infinite, but it requires a willing vessel, a heart that is ready to receive, and a life that says, Lord, I am open to you in every way. So today, hear this clearly. God is not waiting for you to push harder, work longer, or struggle more. He is waiting for your openness. He's waiting for your willingness to step aside, let go, and let him move. He's waiting for a heart that is ready to receive, a spirit that is ready to believe, and a life that is ready to surrender. When you choose openness over effort, trust over striving, and faith over fear, you will unlock the miracles, breakthroughs, and supernatural power that God has always intended for you. Your efforts are not meaningless, but your openness is what allows God to multiply them beyond human imagination. Open your heart today. Open your mind. Open your life. Let go of striving, let go of control, and step fully into God's hands. Miracles happen when openness meets God's power. And today is the day your breakthrough begins. Human effort has limits. Divine power has no boundaries. This is a reality that can free you from the exhausting cycle of striving, pushing, and trying to make everything happen on your own. Far too often, we place our hope in our own abilities, our own understanding, our own energy, and our own strategies. We think if we just work harder, think smarter, and pray longer, we can bend circumstances to our will. But human effort, no matter how persistent or clever, is finite. It has a ceiling. It has limits. Our strength can only take us so far. Divine power, however, knows no limits. It has no ceiling. It is infinite, unstoppable, and boundless. When we learn to release our limitations and rely on God's limitless power, we step into a realm of supernatural possibilities. Consider the story of David and Goliath. On the surface, it appeared impossible for a young shepherd boy to defeat a giant warrior armed with years of battle experience and massive strength. Human logic screamed that David's chances were slim at best, but David understood a principle that many of us forget. His strength was not in his own hands, but in the power of God working through him. He didn't rely on his own effort to overcome the giant. He relied on God's limitless power. One stone thrown in faith defeated the enemy. Human effort alone would never have been enough, but divine power had no bow. Too many of us live under the lie that we must push harder, do more, and exhaust ourselves to see results. We try to manufacture breakthroughs in our relationships, our finances, our health, or our careers with our own hands. But God is not impressed by our exhaustion or our effort. He is moved by our faith in his power. There is a freedom in realizing that you don't have to do everything yourself. There is joy in letting go of the pressure to control every detail. Divine power is not activated by human striving. It is released by faith, obedience, and trust in God's limitless ability. Jesus demonstrated this truth over and over again. He healed the sick, calmed storms, fed thousands, and even raised the dead, not because he strained or exhausted himself, but because he operated in perfect alignment with the Father. His miracles were not the product of human effort. They were the expression of divine power, and the same power is available to you today. When you stop relying solely on your own strength and step into God's power, you discover that limitations are broken, barriers fall, and the impossible becomes reality. Human effort can be exhausting, discouraging, and limited. It often leads to frustration because no matter how hard you try, some things are simply beyond your control. Divine power, on the other hand, has no boundaries. It does not run out. It does not fail. It does not depend on circumstances, timing, or human ability. When you align your life with God, when you choose faith over fear, surrender over striving, and trust over self-reliance, you step into a realm where his power can move without restriction. This is where true breakthroughs happen. Think about the feeding of the 5,000. The disciples saw the small lunch, the limited resources, and thought in human terms, there is no way this can feed thousands. But Jesus took what they had, gave thanks, and multiplied it beyond their imagination. Their limited resources met limitless power, and the result was supernatural provision. That same principle applies to you. Your limited effort, your small resources, your human understanding are enough when they are placed in God's hands. He can take the little and turn it into the abundant. He can take your limitations and turn them into testimony. He can take what seems impossible and make it possible. There is a freedom that comes in recognizing that you are not responsible for creating miracles with your own strength. There is peace in understanding that God is not impressed by your exhaustion, your hustle, or your relentless striving. Divine power does not operate according to human limits. It operates according to God's infinite wisdom, perfect timing, and boundless ability. When you release yourself from the tyranny of human effort and step fully into God's power, you step into the miraculous. Your life may feel overwhelming. The challenges may seem insurmountable. You may have tried everything within your power and still see no results. But this is the moment to remember, your effort has limits, but God's power has none. Your human strength is finite, but his strength is infinite. Your resources are limited, but his provision is endless. Your understanding is small, but his wisdom is infinite. When you surrender your limits to him, when you stop trying to make things happen with your own hands, divine power takes over and the impossible begins to happen. So today, step out of the exhausting cycle of human striving. Step into the freedom of divine power. Release your limits. Stop trying to do everything yourself and trust the one who has no boundaries, no restrictions, and no end to his ability to work in your life. Miracles, breakthroughs, healing, provision, and restoration are all waiting for you. Not because of how hard you push, but because of how fully you trust God's limitless power. Align yourself with him today and watch his boundaries disappear, mountains move, and the impossible becomes possible. Faith without surrender leads to exhaustion, not breakthrough. This is a principle that many believers struggle to understand. We are taught to have faith, to believe, to act, and to pray, but often that faith is mixed with human effort and control. We try to make things happen, pushing ourselves beyond our natural limits, thinking that our effort is the measure of our faith. But real faith is not measured by how hard you try. It is measured by how fully you trust, how deeply you surrender, and how willing you are to step aside and let God act. Faith without surrender can leave you weary, frustrated, and empty because it is trying to accomplish the impossible in your own strength rather than aligning with God's supernatural power. Consider the Israelites in the wilderness. They had seen God's miracles, heard his promises, and yet they continued to grumble, fight, and strive to make their situation better in human ways. They attempted to control their journey, relying on their own effort to survive, and it led to exhaustion, defeat, and delay. God had already provided dead manna, water, and protection. Their breakthrough was available, but it required surrender. Faith without surrender kept them trapped. It was not until they trusted God's plan fully, stepped out in obedience, and surrendered their ways to his guidance that they experienced the fullness of his provision. Many of us are living in the same cycle today. We pray, we fast, we work hard, and we give our all, yet the results are delayed and the pressure mounts. We begin to think that faith is about effort, about persistence, about proving our commitment through exhaustion. But true faith is different. True faith is active trust. True faith is saying, Lord, I believe. I believe in your power, your timing, and your plan, and I surrender my control to you. This surrender transforms faith from a burden into a pathway for miracles, from exhaustion into empowerment, and from striving into peace. Think about the story of Elijah on Mount Carmel. Elijah had faith that God was able to demonstrate his power, but he didn't try to force the miracle through human effort. He prayed, he obeyed, and he trusted. When the moment came, fire fell from heaven, consuming the sacrifice and demonstrating God's glory. Elijah's faith was effective because it was surrendered to God's will. He didn't add human effort to God's work. He allowed God's power to flow unhindered. This is the key for us. Surrender multiplies faith. It releases the supernatural. Without surrender, faith becomes a heavy, exhausting, and ineffective effort that drains your energy instead of producing results. Faith without surrender also creates unnecessary struggle. Many of us are striving to see our prayers answered, to experience healing, or to achieve breakthrough, but we are holding tightly to our own ways, insisting on control and trying to force outcomes. This creates tension, anxiety, and fatigue. Surrender releases that tension. Surrender is an act of trust that says, I may not understand how it will happen, but I believe God is at work, and I will step aside and let him lead. This is where true miracles begin. This is where faith is no longer a struggle, but a powerful channel through which God moves. Jesus demonstrated the ultimate example of surrendered faith. In the Garden of Gethsemane, he prayed, not my will, but yours be done. Here was perfect faith, yet completely surrendered. He knew the pain, the challenge, and the suffering that lay ahead, but he trusted the Father's plan more than his own understanding. This surrender allowed the power of God to move through him, culminating in the resurrection and the salvation of the world. Faith without surrender cannot produce that level of power. Faith combined with surrender opens the door for God to do what only he can do. Surrender is also the antidote to fear and doubt. When we rely on our own strength, we worry, we panic, and we try to control outcomes. But when we surrender, we place our faith fully in God's hands and fear loses its grip. Surrender creates confidence, peace, and clarity. It allows us to rest in the assurance that God is bigger than our problems, stronger than our challenges, and able to do what we cannot. Faith without surrender leaves us exhausted, but faith with surrender energizes the soul, empowers the spirit, and aligns us with the supernatural. Every breakthrough begins with surrender. Every miracle requires a heart willing to let go of human control and fully trust God. The problem is not your faith, it is the mixture of faith with striving. When you try to produce results through your own effort, you are relying on limited human power. But when you surrender your ways, your plans, and your striving to God, your faith becomes a conduit for limitless divine power. Surrender transforms faith into a living, breathing force that God can use to move mountains, open doors, restore relationships, and provide for every need. So today, wherever you are in your life, recognize that faith alone is not enough. Faith without surrender will leave you tired, frustrated, and stuck. But faith that surrenders releases God's supernatural power. Say, Lord, I trust you. I surrender this situation. I release my control. I step aside and let you act. When you do, you will see breakthroughs that human effort could never produce, miracles that defy logic, and blessings that overflow beyond what you imagined. Faith with surrender is not just a principle. It is the key that unlocks the supernatural in your life. God's timing is perfect. He isn't waiting for you to push, but for you to trust. This is a truth that can completely change the way you view waiting, delay, and seasons of uncertainty in your life. So often we get frustrated because things are not happening on our timetable. We try to force breakthroughs, speed up answers to prayers, and manufacture results in our own strength. We wonder why, despite all our effort, nothing seems to move. But here is the heart of the matter. God's timing is perfect. He is not waiting for you to try harder. He is waiting for you to trust him, to align your heart with his plan, and to recognize that the season you are in is preparing you for something greater. Waiting is not wasted time. Waiting is God's way of developing your character, expanding your faith, and preparing the ground for the miracle he is about to release. When you rush, when you try to push, when you step outside God's timing, you may miss the fullness of what he intends. Abraham waited decades for the promise of Isaac. He could have tried to engineer the outcome, and in fact, at one point he did. But God's ultimate plan unfolded in perfect timing. Abraham's breakthrough came not because of his effort, but because of his trust in God's timing. What God is preparing for you is worth the wait, and your willingness to trust him fully is the key that unlocks it. Trusting God's timing requires patience, humility, and a heart willing to surrender control. It is not always easy. The human heart wants instant results. The natural mind wants to see progress, to understand every step, and to take control when things seem delayed. But God operates outside of human limitations. His plan is bigger, his wisdom is higher, and his timing is perfect. What seems late to you is never late to him. What seems delayed is actually being orchestrated for maximum impact, maximum blessing, and maximum glory. Trusting his timing means believing that he knows what is best and that his plan is far greater than anything you could arrange on your own. Consider Joseph, who was sold into slavery, falsely accused, and thrown into prison. By human standards, he was far from success. By human standards, he could have given up, abandoned faith, or tried to take matters into his own hands. Yet Joseph trusted God's timing. He did not rush the process. He did not manipulate circumstances. He walked in integrity, remained faithful, and trusted that God's plan would unfold. Years later, Joseph was elevated to a position of power in Egypt, becoming a savior for his family and countless others. His breakthrough came not when he tried harder, but when he trusted God's perfect timing. God's timing is often different from ours, and this is where faith becomes critical. Faith allows you to trust when the circumstances don't make sense. Faith allows you to believe when human logic screams otherwise. Faith allows you to rest in the assurance that God is at work even when you cannot see the full picture. When you trust God's timing, you stop pushing against closed doors, you stop straining against delays, and you step into a posture of expectancy that aligns with heaven. Miracles happen when we align our hearts with God's schedule rather than forcing our own. Waiting in trust also produces spiritual growth. The season of waiting stretches your character, deepens your faith, and teaches you dependence on God. It is during these seasons that God is preparing you for the breakthrough, teaching you lessons that you will carry for the rest of your life. The waiting is not a punishment, it is a preparation. The delay is not a denial, it is a design. Your breakthrough is coming, and it will be far greater than what you could have orchestrated on your own. Trust in God's timing is the bridge between your current circumstances and the miracle that he has promised. Many people miss God's timing because they attempt to force it. They try harder, push further, and take matters into their own hands. But forcing God's hand can actually delay what he has intended. God's power flows most freely when we align with his timing rather than our own. He is not passive. He is not distant. He is working behind the scenes, orchestrating events, people, and opportunities to bring about the perfect result. Your role is not to rush, it is to trust. Your role is not to manipulate, it is to surrender. Your role is to believe that God's timing is perfect and that the breakthrough is already on the way. So today, release the pressure to make things happen on your own schedule. Stop straining, stop worrying, stop rushing. God is not waiting for you to push harder. He is waiting for you to trust. Trust that the season you are in is necessary. Trust that his plan is greater than your understanding, and trust that his timing is perfect. When you align your heart with his timing, when you step into patience and faith, you position yourself to receive the fullness of his promises. Your breakthrough is closer than you think, and it will arrive in the perfect way, at the perfect time, and with the power of God behind it. True freedom and peace are found in letting God be God. This is one of the most liberating truths you will ever grasp in your life. So many believers live in a constant state of pressure, anxiety, and striving because they are trying to control things that only God can control. They try to fix their circumstances, manufacture solutions, and carry burdens that were never meant to rest on their shoulders. They think that if they just work harder, pray longer, or plan more carefully, they can force God's hand. But here is the liberating truth. God is not waiting for your effort. He is waiting for you to let him be God. When you release control, surrender your striving, and allow him to act, you step into true freedom and peace. Freedom comes when you stop trying to be the solution and start trusting God as the solution. Many of us have been living under the illusion that our strength is the key to breakthrough, that our understanding is the key to progress, and that our effort is the key to success. But human strength is limited. Understanding is finite, and for it alone cannot unlock the miraculous. God's power, wisdom, and timing are infinite. True freedom begins when you acknowledge that there is a higher power at work, a perfect plan unfolding, and that your role is not to manipulate it, but to trust it. When you allow God to be God, you are no longer weighed down by worry, fear, or frustration. You are released into a life of peace, confidence, and supernatural alignment. Think about Jesus' teaching on worry. He said, "Do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own." He was revealing a principle that applies not only to worry, but to control. We worry because we are trying to be God. We try to control outcomes because we refuse to let God be God. When we step aside, surrender our plans, and trust him fully, worry loses its grip, anxiety fades, and peace fills the space the striving once occupied. This is the freedom that comes from letting God take his rightful place in your life. Peace is also the result of surrendering control. When you stop pushing, stop manipulating, stop forcing outcomes, you make room for God's perfect plan to unfold. Many people miss this truth because they confuse action with control. Action is necessary, yes. Obedience, diligence, prayer, and faith are all part of God's plan, but control belongs to God alone. Trying to control the process, the people, or the timing will only frustrate you and steal your peace. True peace flows when you step into your role as a trusting child of God and allow him to orchestrate the miraculous. Consider the story of Hannah in the Bible. She desperately wanted a child, and for years she prayed and waited. She could have tried to take matters into her own hands, but she chose to surrender her situation completely to God. She poured out her heart in prayer, trusted him with her longing, and let him be God in her circumstances. In due time, she conceived Samuel, a prophet who would play a crucial role in Israel's history. Hannah's freedom, her peace, and her breakthrough came when she stopped trying to control what only God could handle and trusted him fully. Letting God be God also transforms your perspective. When you stop believing that everything depends on you, you can begin to see the supernatural working around you. Opportunities, favor, divine connections, and miraculous provision begin to manifest. God's power flows into your life more freely when you are not resisting his control. Your heart becomes lighter, your mind clearer, and your spirit stronger. You no longer feel the heavy burden of making everything happen yourself because you recognize that God is fully capable, fully trustworthy, and fully in control. Many Christians struggle because they are living in a cycle of striving and worry, trying to manipulate circumstances to fit their plans. But God's ways are higher, his understanding deeper, and his timing perfect. True freedom and peace are found when you release your grip and let him take his rightful place as God in your life. It is in surrender, not struggle, that miracles begin to unfold. It is in trust, not toil, that provision manifests. It is in letting him be God that every impossibility becomes possible. So today, release your control. Let go of striving. Stop trying to make things happen with your own hands and step fully into trust. Say, Lord, I surrender this situation. I release my plans. I stop trying to force outcomes. I let you be God in my life. When you do, you will experience a peace that surpasses understanding, a freedom that cannot be taken away, and breakthroughs that no amount of human effort could ever achieve. God is not waiting for you to try harder. He is waiting for you to let him be God. Your miracles, your healing, your provision, and your blessings are all waiting on the other side of surrender. True freedom, true peace, and true power begin the moment you stop trying to be God and allow him to be God in your life.